WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and 1 p.m. in Lagos. Good afternoon and thank you for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. First, our top stories. Ghana welcomes UN resolution recognizing the slave trade as a crime against humanity.
Adoption of this text is not an arrival at a destination, but rather a major step in our ongoing journey and collective conversation for reparatory justice.
WDL convenes a forum on democracy and good governance in Benin. Gambian President Barrow delivers 2026 State of Nation address outlining achievements, challenges, and future policies.
Irregular migration continues to rob our nation of its youth. We are treating this issue by creating opportunities for decent jobs.
And former army commander convicted of 2009 Conakry Stadium massacre dies in prison. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is a More Edit.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. We'll begin with the reactions to the United Nations resolution recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. The landmark motion adopted on Wednesday received 123 votes in favor, 3 against, and 52 abstentions. Ghana's Foreign Minister Samuel Okudzeto-Blakwa has described the move, which also calls for reparations, as a moment of truth for the world. From Accra, WDL's Nadide Tete reports.
The new resolution recognizes the transatlantic slave trade as one of the greatest injustices in history, highlighting its lasting impact through inequality, racial discrimination, and development challenges. It also calls on former slave trading nations to engage in dialogue with African countries on reparations, including compensation, debt relief, development support, and the return of looted artifacts. Speaking in New York after the vote, Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto-Blakwa described the move as a turning point in confronting the past.
Adoption of this text is not an arrival at a destination, but rather a major step in our ongoing journey and collective conversation for reparatory justice. We remain committed to continued engagement with all member states in the shared spirit of cooperation.
The United States, the United Kingdom, Argentina, Israel, and several European countries opposed the resolution. Both the EU and the US voiced concerns that the resolution could imply a hierarchy among crimes against humanity, treating some as more serious than others. Here is Mr. Okudzeto-Blakwa's response to that.
Never in the history of mankind have we had such a systemic crime. We took more than 300 years with its consequences still lingering onto this day, manifesting in racism, in structural inequality. So we are talking about the contextual framing of what has happened, not about ranking crimes.
The motion received strong backing from African and Caribbean nations, with supporters saying it signals a shift from symbolic recognition to concrete demands for justice. For WADR, Nadiri Tete, Accra.
Now to Benin, where West Africa Democracy Radio Forum on Wednesday held a regional forum on democracy and good governance in the sub-region. The event brought together political leaders, civil society actors, journalists, and academics. Discussion focused on good governance and democracy in West Africa. In this report by Augustine Colin, we hear the voices defending democracy and freedom across the region.
Discussions at the forum focused on the democratic challenges facing West Africa, with Benin set to hold its presidential election on April 12 following a recent attempted coup. The role of civil society in strengthening democracy and good governance was central to the talks. Jean-Baptiste, a civic activist, shares his perspective.
Democracy must be maintained every day. We should not wait for election period to defend it. The rule of law is the foundation for progress. Beyond that, checks and balances are the pillars and walls. The judiciary must be independent so that judges have the courage to say no to the president, to other institutional leaders, and to ministers whenever there are abuses.
Given the many democratic and governance challenges in the region, the responsibility of the press, represented at the forum, was also highlighted. As a bridge between citizens and leaders, the media plays a key role in governance. Herman Pavid Anyambusu, journalist and political analyst, contributed his insights.
Les médias d'abord jouent un rôle avant-gardiste.
The media play a leading role as watchdogs, raising awareness and helping to keep the pillars of democracy strong. Elections are important, of course, but once they are over, the real challenge is ensuring that campaign promises are translated into concrete government action.
At the close of the discussions, participants called on all stakeholders to mobilize in support of stronger democracy and governance across West Africa.
A report by our Cotonou correspondent Aziz Adam Sule and voiced by Augustine Colley. Still in Benin, the Economic Community of West African State ECOWAS has deployed a long-term election observation mission to the country ahead of the April 12 presidential polls. 15 experts from across the sub-region will be in the country from March 22 to April 18, days after the crucial ballot. Usman Mar reports.
The observers, drawn from fields such as law, diplomacy, security and media, will monitor all stages of the electoral process in Benin, from pre-election period to voting day and the aftermath. Their role will also include supporting early warning systems, preventing conflict and promoting transparency. ECOWAS is also expected to deploy around 100 additional short-term observers closer to election day, along with a situation room to track developments and provide daily updates. The move follows a fact-finding mission in January, which engaged government officials, political parties and civil society. The stakes are high ahead of the April 12 presidential election, with the main opposition Democrats Party barred from participating. Meanwhile, the ruling coalition's candidate, Romuald Wadani, has unveiled his manifesto, promising improved living standards and stronger security. With Benin facing increased terrorist threats and the increasing cost of living, these issues are expected to shape debate in the lead-up to the vote and beyond.
Osman Omar reporting there.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
The Gambia's President Adama Barrow delivered his 2026 State of the Nation SONA address on Thursday, highlighting key achievements, challenges and plans for the upcoming month. In his address to the National Assembly, Barrow outlined progress in transport infrastructure, energy access, bilateral partnerships and other significant reforms achieved over the past year. Adama Barrow pledged to tackle irregular migration by prioritizing job creation for young people. He also addressed the government's efforts to tackle economic constraints, including land disputes and security issues. Additionally, the Gambian leader promised that transparent general elections will be conducted in December 2026.
Mr. Speaker, to transform our economy, our economic structure, we are investing in industrial parks, urban agricultural hubs, and special economic zones, those moving the Gambia away from raw exports towards value addition, manufacturing, and exports. Irregular migration continues to rob our nation of its youth. We are treating this issue with utmost urgency by creating opportunities for decent jobs, skills development, and legal labor pathways through strengthening TVET systems and bilateral labor agreements for safe, regular, and orderly migration. Gambians are now working legally in Europe and in the Middle East. Infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. My administration continues to work tirelessly to close the infrastructure gap. Since 2017, the government has constructed over 1,200 kilometers of all-weather roads, significantly improving national connectivity. In 2025, the 84-kilometer Nyomi-Hakalan Road was inaugurated, and the Kiang West and Bluefoot-Madiana-Banyaka roads have reached advanced stages. Phase 3 of the OIC road has progressed satisfactorily, with completion of the Sukuta over-bypass expected this year.
Gambian President Adama Barrow speaking there. In the Gambia also, civil society actors, legal experts, diplomats and state officials converge in Banjul for a roundtable discussion on the Draft Constitution Amendment Bill 2026. The event, organized by the European Union, focused on reserved seats for women and persons with disabilities in the Gambian Constitution. Our Banjul correspondent Sang Dinamendi completes the story.
Deliberations at the roundtable were centered on inclusive governance, constitutional reforms, and better political representation for marginalized groups. EU Ambassador Imaroka Iko-Torres underscored the importance of gender equality and the inclusion of women and persons with disabilities as key to a representative democracy.
Women are male representation in politics, in economics, in social sphere, but I think that it's very important that we understand it's women being half of the population, in most countries being over 50% of the voters, they are not represented or sufficiently represented.
Civil society groups are that increasing women's participation is not just about equality, but a component of inclusive governance and sustainable development. Despite recent democratic progress, the low number of women in leadership remains a major gap, says Jabusi Sawo of the National Youth Parliament.
For far too long, women have been underrepresented in political spaces. And this is not because they are not competent or because they are not interested to take part in politics, but it is due to structural barriers. When you look at the structure of the National Youth Parliament, you will realize that we have a similar model. We have representation across constituencies. We have female reps across all the 7 regions of the Gambia.
The 2026 Amendment Bill proposes reserving 14 parliamentary seats for women and aims to build support for a constitutional quota to ensure more inclusive political participation. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sangdala Mendy, reporting from Banjul.
In Guinea, former Army Commander Boubacar Jakite, known as Tumba, has died. Until his death on Tuesday, the ex-Edo camp to former junta leader Captain Musa Dadis Camara was serving a 10-year sentence at Koya prison. He was convicted by a court in Conakry for his role in the September 28, 2009 massacre. Abdullah Hassan has the rest of the story.
The death of former Army Commander Abubakar Siddiqui Jakite, also known as Tumba Jakite, was confirmed on Wednesday by the Guinean prison authorities. Jakite, the former aide-de-camp to ex-Guinean leader Captain Musa Dadis Camara, passed away on Tuesday night at the age of 58. He was serving a 10-year prison sentence at Koya Central Prison after being convicted of crimes against humanity for his role in the September 28, 2009 massacre in Conakry. He had been transferred there just over a month ago. Following a medical emergency in his cell, he was treated at the military hospital at Camp Samori Touré in Conakry. The prison administration stated that he suffered from multiple health conditions, and despite care from a qualified medical team, his condition deteriorated. Jakite had been found guilty of participating in the killing of more than 150 civilians at the stadium in Conakry, with reports indicating that around 100 women were also raped, according to the UN. The massacre occurred during protests against the military regime at the time, as opponents challenged the continued rule of the armed forces.
Abdullah Hassan with that report by WDR's channel Alpha Ibrahim Abaude in Conakry. In neighboring Sierra Leone, the government has issued a revised number of deportations of its nationals from Guinea. As of Wednesday, 942 Sierra Leoneans have been received at the Gambia border. The deportation follows a clearing operation by Guinean authorities targeting undocumented foreign residents in Conakry, particularly around the Bolbinet port area. At the Sierra Leonean border, the deported nationals are being screened, documented, and assisted with reintegration into their communities. The government says it will continue to monitor the situation and has urged the public to remain calm and rely on official information. In Liberia, budget cuts are undermining the fight against a growing human trafficking crisis, a violation that threatens the safety and future of the country's most vulnerable. As criminal networks increasingly target minors for cross-border exploitation, the government's ability to respond is being weakened by sharp reductions in investigative funding. While the recent sentencing of 5 traffickers shows that progress is possible, such successes are becoming harder to achieve without adequate resources. WDR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker completes the story.
The Liberian government says protecting children from acts such as trafficking requires a sustained funding. To ensure justice is now undermined by the lack of resources. Labour Minister Cooper Kraft says the budget for prosecuting trafficking cases has dropped sharply. Kraft adds that the budget cut limits the ministry's ability to carry out complex investigations and to dismantle trafficking networks.
Some time ago, we were very good in the prosecution was going very well because there were good fundings. The fundings under the budget for human trafficking for all the cases we had to do was something like $250,000. Today, we are receiving only $50,000 for the whole fiscal period to prosecute these cases, which made it a little bit difficult.
He also described the sentencing of 5 women to 20 years in prison for human trafficking in Monrovia as a major boost to the fight.
Sometimes in April 2025, immigration officers assigned at the red light were able to intercept 5 women who were trafficking children that were destined for Burkina Faso. Ages of those children ran from 8 months to 11 years. They were imagining that these women were taking these children, minor babies and all, without their parents.
The minister warns that without increased funding, efforts to sustain this level of enforcement could be at risk. According to the government data, traffickers prey on Liberian men, women, and children, both within the country and across the region, particularly in West African nations such as Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mauritania, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, and online at wadr.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Ghana welcomes UN resolution recognizing the slave trade as a crime against humanity. WADR convenes a forum on democracy and good governance in Benin. Gambian President Barrow delivers 2026 State of the Nation address, outlines achievements, challenges and future policies. And former army commander convicted of 2009 stadium massacre in Conakry dies in prison. Still ahead, we do have the press review, a guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
We're streaming on wadr.org. Now to Nigeria, where the 2026 Afro-Caribbean Investment Summit is underway. It aims to boost trade, investment and private sector partnerships between Africa and the Caribbean. The event is focused on unlocking opportunities within combined market estimated at around $40 trillion across Africa, the Caribbean and the Americas. WDL's Abuja correspondent Yechenu Sasichu reports.
Organizers say the summit aims to deepen South-South cooperation and expand private sector partnerships, especially as trade between both regions currently accounts for less than 1% of total exchanges. Speaking at the summit, Regional Chief Operating Officer for Anglophone at Afrexim Bank, Eric Ntong, highlighted the need for both regions to leverage their respective strengths to unlock economic opportunities.
Today, Africa and the Caribbean represent a combined population of over 1.7 billion people, endowed with abundant natural resources, vibrant cultures, and a rapidly expanding youth demographic.
Also speaking, the Minister for Creative Economy in St. Kitts and Nevis, Samal Duggins, emphasized the importance of sustainability in agriculture as a pathway to long-term economic resilience.
We must rethink the concept of agriculture, not just as a means of survival, but as a means of the future economic strategy. We must produce more, process more, trade more. We must embrace innovation and climate resilience.
Nigeria's Minister of Agriculture, Abubakar Kyari, also highlighted the need to prioritize food security as part of broader efforts to strengthen economic cooperation and ensure stability across regions.
The question of food is no longer just about agriculture. It is about economic resilience, trade competitiveness, and national stability. Food security is not just a development issue. It is an economic imperative.
The summit provides a platform to explore new trade routes, investment flows, and collaborative opportunities across key sectors including agriculture, finance, health, and the creative economy. For WADR, Yechenu Sasitu in Abuja.
This is the Newspaper Review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the Newspaper Review.
The Newspaper Review.
We head now to Accra as we join Nadi Detete for the press review.
We'll start off with the Daily Graphic newspaper front page. Africa wins historic vote on slavery. Ghana spearheads resolution at UN. Trafficking declared grievous crime. Also here, the Chronicle newspaper. Galamsey is Ghana's enemy. We are fighting the canker. That's according to NIMOS. Also here, West Africa must act swiftly on climate change and conflict risks. That's according to the local government minister Ahmed Ibrahim. The Daily Guide newspaper front page. Local government minister calls for swift climate conflict risk action, and Assemblies of God Ghana reacts to Mahama degree withdrawal. The Daily Post newspaper. Mahama champions UN vote to recognize slavery as grievous crime against humanity, and Galamsey remains the enemy of the state and we won't relax, NIMOS boss assures in quarterly report. The Daily Searchlight. Majority blocks 68 billion Ghana cedis audit probe with false claim of urgent parliamentary business. The Daybreak newspaper front page. Upon paper speaks out, says no embassy publicly honors a spy. The Archives newspaper. Mahama secures historic backing for slave reparations despite US, Argentina and Israel voting against. The National Enquirer. No tomato shortage expected. That's according to the Agri Minister Eric Opoku as he assures the nation. And we'll wrap up with the Spider newspaper front page. Farmers urge swift intervention over Burkina Faso export ban. Also here, UN adopts Ghana-led resolution on slave trade as crime against humanity. That's it for the newspaper review segment. Is back to you in the studio.
Many thanks, Nadi Detete there.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
In this segment of the news, we focus on the latest United Nations resolution recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity, calling for reparatory justice. The landmark motion adopted on Wednesday received 123 votes in favor, 3 against, and 52 abstentions. Ghana, which championed the move through President John Mahama, describes the move as a moment of truth for the world. Our guest is Kwadwo Apiajeng Atwa, a Ghanaian professor of international law and justice, and speaks about the landmark resolution.
It is indeed remarkable and a very positive development in terms of the fight for reparations for slavery and the slave trade. In that sense, we applaud our president for taking the lead as provided by the AU to champion this initiative. Now, having said that, is this decision implementable? What we need to note is that, in the first place, if you look at the history of the fight for reparations for the slave trade, this is not the first time this is happening. In fact, when African states gained their independence through the OAU, such an initiative started. And in 1974, we know that at the General Assembly, they passed the new International Economic Order, which included questions for reparations, or even indirectly, it called for setting in place a new regime for international trade, which connects to the slave trade and colonialism. But we know that not much has come out of it because of the nature and the structure of the UN system. And the General Assembly's resolutions are not legally binding, except when we are talking about the budget and admissions and a few other situations. So that means that it's only recommendatory or advisory, and therefore it leaves it open for states to accept it or not to accept it.
Ghana played a leading role in championing this resolution. What does this mean for Ghana's position in global diplomacy and its leadership role within Africa on issues of historical justice?
Yes, certainly Ghana championed it, and I think that the way the president spoke, even last year at the UN General Assembly, and so far recommendations and statements made are considered as very well crafted and very well delivered. And so in that sense, it puts Ghana in a very favorable position internationally. It seems to remind us of the position taken by our first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, on the international stage, where he championed such causes.
For African nations broadly, what could reparative justice look like in concrete terms? Is it financial compensation, debt relief, institutional reform, or something else?
For me, I see reparative justice in two senses. One should come from the victims themselves, represented by their leadership, and then from the perpetrators. For me, for a reparative justice approach to work, it should not aim simply at reparation in the form of compensation. It should rather focus on how we recognize the injustices, the historical injustices, and making sure that people are empowered and given agency and be given recognition of their rights and dignity as human beings within their own countries. Where democracy is thriving, and by democracy I mean any form of governance system, including our own traditional governance systems, that will ensure that people's rights are respected and people's dignity are protected. And I think that this will enable every citizen to understand what is the impact of the slave trade and to be part of the movement to demand reparations. And so at the end of the day, reparations should involve some work being done by our own governments, because as we speak, our governments are also benefiting from the impact of the slave trade and colonialism, because the kind of governance system that we have, even the language that we speak, are all a reflection of the slave trade and colonialism. And African leaders are not doing much in terms of returning us as much as possible to be able to recapture what was working for us in the past before slave trade and colonialism came in.
That was Kwadwo Appiah-Jiatwa, Ghanaian Professor of International Law and Justice. In sport news, Nigeria's senior national team, the Super Eagles, have officially commenced preparations in Antalya, Turkey, ahead of the upcoming international friendly matches against Iran national football team and the Jordan national football team. Among the first set of arrivals are Alex Iwobi, Paul Onuachu, Moses Simon, and Frank Onyeka, alongside several other invited players. Nigeria will face the Iranian national side on Friday, March 27 at the Atlia Stadium, with a kickoff set for 4 p.m. The three-time African champions will take on Jordan on March 31 in their second friendly fixture scheduled for 8 p.m. And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudou Diouf for the technical support. Let's keep the conversation coming on all of our social media platforms, TikTok, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Nibe County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Radio Gulf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone in Nigeria, and Love 104.5 FM Abuja.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.